Hey, Slider Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. Welcome to our special, The Born Identity. Newsflash, men and women are different. Now, we've had decades of feminism in action saying that men and women are the same in every single way. How's it going? Is everyone happy? Things are going good. Our experiment of pretending that there's no difference between men and women has resulted in everyone miserable, and also women in combat roles in the military, and of course a lowering of standards to get into those combat roles to achieve that oh so noble goal, and men acting more like women. We're happy? Everything good? The pinnacle of this broken ideology is transgenderism. Transgenderism, the idea that simultaneously there's no such thing as gender and you can switch genders. Which is weird because there's no such thing as them, but you're in the wrong one and flip them. It's odd. Why does this matter? I got to come out of the top with this. If the progressives on the left can humiliate you enough into agreeing that gender does not exist or you can switch genders, then there is nothing that they can't get you to agree with. What line do you ever now have the moral courage to draw? You're letting little kids get mutilated and chemically castrated in the name of being nice. And you think you'll ever have two legs to stand on ever again on anything? They're humiliating you. Stop being humiliated. Take a stand on this issue. Not only transgenderism, but also on gender existing, and dare I even say proper gender roles. I want to focus on this intro here on transgender kids, this idea of transgender kids in the name of progress, right? What we've been doing to kids, what we're now allowing is incredible. We have three great guests today. First guest out of the gate here is going to be the Arkansas legislature, who sponsored the bill that would ban puberty blockers for kids and sex change surgeries for kids. That's the bill in Arkansas that the Republican governor vetoed. We talked a lot about that bill a couple weeks ago. I'm really excited to talk to the sponsor of it. We live in a time where the very concept of gender is under attack. Kindergartners are told there's no such thing as gender and you can choose it on a whim. Kindergartners are told that the doctor was only guessing what gender you are. You're the one who really decides. This is Sophia Bush. She's an actress. She was on, I don't know what show she was on, One Tree Hill or something like that. She says, this is on her Instagram the other day, trans kids are under attack across the country. Arkansas just banned them from accessing health care. They call this health care. This is tantamount to murder. Kids will tell us who they are. It's our job to support them, not demonize or harm them. It's murder. So if you disagree with the stuff we're going to be talking about today, if you think kids can't change genders, and instead you should help a gender dysmorphic child become comfortable in their body, then you're committing murder. When they inflame the rhetoric like that, they're up to something. It's important to them, this issue. It's important to them that they jam this through our culture. It needs to be important to us too. Check this video out. This is how easy it is to confuse a child.
So you are a transgender boy, you know what that means?
So you were born a girl, but you feel like a boy, right? That kind of means you're transgender. Okay? And that's okay, but that's just the term for it. Do you like doing quiet girly activities, or do you like jumping around and being crazy and tackling everybody?
Boy activities.
Boy activities.
Oh yeah, boy activities. Not amazing. Hey kid, are you like a lame, stupid girl? Or do you prefer jumping and playing and eating pizza and having fun? Oh, you're transgender. Walt Heyer, he runs this group. It's at sexchangeregret.com. He deals with people who regret their transitioning process. We talked to him on the radio show recently. He said every single case of transgenderism, which is really just gender or body dysmorphia, every single case is caused by a traumatic event. So whenever he talks to someone who's dealing with this, he always asks them, what happened? What happened to you that makes you not like who you are? Not in a mean way. It's not like, what happened to you? It's like, what happened? Like, tell me what happened that makes you not like who you are? For him, for Walt, his dad would drop him off at his grandma's house when he was younger, and his grandma was a seamstress, and she would have him try on these dresses and then tell him how pretty he was. Pretty of a girl, how pretty of a girl, right? He was 4 years old. And that messed with his head. And then when he was 8, he was molested by his uncle. And he thought, that wouldn't have happened if I didn't have this genitalia. So that led him down the road of thinking he was really a woman. So you can see how not properly dealt with trauma can lead to someone being confused about their gender. And it's becoming more and more prevalent. The number of high school kids who identify as transgender has increased 20,000%, right? It was 0.01% of kids, and now it's 2% of kids. That's just over the last few years. You didn't know a single transgender kid when you were growing up. And now every school has some. Kids identify as transgender. What's going on? This is a social contagion. It's a trendy form of self-harm, a trendy form of self-mutilation. It's the ultimate in cancel culture. You're trying to cancel yourself. It's a new way that kids think they can deal with trauma, a way that they can run away from themselves, run away from their environment, run away from their identity entirely, pretend to be someone else. Maybe if I was a different gender, then this bad thing wouldn't have happened. If I was a boy or if I was a girl, then my parents wouldn't have gotten divorced, or then I wouldn't have been abused, then I would be more accepted, then I'd feel more comfortable, then my parents would love me, whatever it is. I've seen so many videos of little boys, they're raised by lesbian parents or single moms. There's no dad, right? No male influence. And the mom these are these videos where they celebrate these kids, and the mom's like, oh yeah, he likes to wear dresses. He just likes to wear dresses. And then the person's like, well, when did he start wearing dresses? Well, I don't know. We would just start, we'd be watching RuPaul's drag show on TV. And he'd say, I want to wear a dress. So I bought him some dresses, and then I praised him for how beautiful he is. And now he just likes to wear dresses all the time. He must be a girl. Like, is everyone out of their minds? You showered him with praise. And that's all kids want is love and attention. And you gave it to him when he wore a dress. You don't see this? You don't see the harm you're causing your child? But now it's becoming mainstream. And again, if you disagree with this, it's tantamount to murder. We've talked before about a dad in Canada. He was going through a divorce. His daughter was 11 when she said she wanted to be a boy. Long story short, the court said to the dad, you must call your daughter a he, and you cannot talk to the media about this. Well, he refused, and he was thrown in jail. And the court accused him of committing family violence. It's the official term, family violence. So if you don't actively advocate for this transgender belief, even in your own child, then you're committing family violence. They've also flipped it around where if let's say your daughter comes to you and says she wants to be a boy, if you help your daughter be more comfortable in who she is as a girl, then you're committing gender conversion. You're helping your daughter be comfortable as a girl. They call that gender conversion. And if you instead say, oh, okay, yeah, you are a boy. Let's give you puberty blockers and give you a double mastectomy and remove your uterus. That's called affirmation. See how messed up this is? So again, why does this matter? If the left can humiliate you into agreeing with this and going along with this or staying silent in the midst of this, what are you going to take a stand on? What's too far? If not this. No. Draw this line. Let's help kids, not permanently damage them in the name of progress. So coming up, we're going to talk with the Arkansas legislature who sponsored that bill. We're going to talk with someone about men competing in women's sports and just how this has infiltrated our schools, including our kindergartners. And then we're going to end with one of my favorite pastors who's going to talk about God's plan, God's design of gender and why he did it this way, and also biblical gender roles and what that means for today. That's all coming up in today's special. Super grateful you're here on the Born Identity. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Study Crusaders, welcome back to our special, The Born Identity. I'm so excited for our next guest. So you'll remember a couple weeks ago, the Arkansas State Legislature passed a bill, HB 1570, the Save Adolescents from Experimentation bill, This bill would have banned puberty-blocking drugs in children and sex change operations in children. Right? That's what the bill did. It passed the Arkansas legislature. The Republican governor vetoed it. What in the world? So let's get the true story here from the representative who sponsored this bill, Robin Lundstrom. She's from the Arkansas House of Representatives. Ms. Lundstrom, how are you today?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
No, I'm really glad you're here. Let's hear it from you first. What exactly does this bill do, or did it do? Would it have done?
Actually, the bill is very tightly crafted. It only does one thing. It prohibits sex change procedures on minors, chemical and surgical. That's it. We didn't touch healthcare. We didn't touch counseling. That's all still part of healthcare in Arkansas. Sadly, a lot of people put out that we were taking away healthcare and taking away counseling, and that's simply not true. But as you can imagine, people like to say things that aren't true in order to grab headlines. But this actually just protects minors from sex change procedures, which the science is very clear. This is not healthy for minors. It goes actually against what's good common sense and what's the science for minors.
Of course. Can you give us an example of what type of procedure or these puberty blocking drugs, what this could look like in a child?
Well, what happens is, say a child is gender distressed or gender confused, they might go to a doctor, and their doctor might put them on hormone suppressors and then put them on cross-sex hormones. Well, during adolescence, there's a lot of things going on during an adolescent's growth, and that drug actually blocks the puberty and then the cross-sex hormones all during the same time. An adolescent is growing up. You've got bone growth, and then the impact on cardiovascular disease, cerebral vascular disease, and then their bone growth. This is a long-term impact on that adolescent's health. All we're saying is let's wait till they get to be 18 before we do something that's going to have a long-term impact on their health.
Oh, it's unbelievable that this got pushed back. It's wild. Okay, so the governor vetoed it. My understanding is, at least what he said, was it's because this is a limited government and we're the party of Ronald Reagan and we shouldn't be getting involved in these types of affairs that should be between a doctor and the patient, which is the same argument for abortion. What do you make of that? What do you make of that argument?
As a conservative, the first thing we want to do is conserve and protect. And I want to conserve and protect our children. That should be something that I think we all agree on. If we want to talk about government intrusion, we can't even take a child home from the hospital without putting them in a car seat. We don't allow children to drink and drive because basically you can't get a drink in Arkansas till you're 21 because of the consequences. Same with smoking. You can't have a tattoo. Can't even change your name in Arkansas until you're 18. Buy spray paint. But if you can't change your name till you're 18, you shouldn't be able to monkey around with your body and sex change hormones. So I thought this was a very tightly crafted bill. We stayed very, very close to just that. We just went to let's not alter an adolescent's health. Counseling and healthcare was still in the bill, and that was a very important thing. So I was surprised. I was disappointed. That's part of the process. The legislature disagreed, so we overrode the veto, and now we've moved on to other things, and other states are now looking at this legislation, and I'm glad to see that.
I'm so grateful you led the way there. Tucker Carlson touched on perhaps the corporate influence on the governor to take such a odd stand against this bill, Walmart in particular, which the Walton Family Foundation issued this super vague but obvious declaration that they're against this bill as well. What do you think about corporate influence on the governor?
Well, I think everybody's allowed to participate in government, but I also think everybody needs to stand up for children. I was disappointed. Obviously, I thought this was kind of a no-brainer. We all want to stand up for kids. I actually got letters from transgender adults that said, I did things under 18 I wouldn't recommend anybody do. Please don't believe we're all bad. This is a good bill. We read the bill and we agree with you. Reverend Graham came out in support of the bill, and then the Women's Liberation Front, who's on far left, came out in support of the bill because they read the bill and said, protect children. So if you can get the Women's Liberation Front, who's far left, and Reverend Franklin Graham on the far right, Family Research Council, and all these other folks that read the bill and just say protect children. I think that's a pretty good place to be.
What kind of pushback have you gotten from the transgender activists? And that could be either the activists who are, I'm sure, very angry at you, but also even when you went through like the committee process, and I'm sure you had people come to you and say, no, this is really important. Like that parents, I'm sure, of transgender kids say this is really important. What have those two fronts meant to you?
Well, we had our first arrest in the state of Arkansas during a committee meeting, but the Capitol Police handled it beautifully. It looked like a training
What
video.
happened?
Well, in Arkansas, everyone is allowed to speak. We have an open Capitol, which is amazing and wonderful. And if you sign up to speak, you're allowed to speak. We might limit the time frame if there's a lot of people that want to speak. We had a hairdresser's bill yesterday and 20 people signed up to speak. Guess what? They get to speak. It's government 101 and it's really cool to watch. But once your time is up, the chair will tell you, you've got 15 seconds left, finish your speech. Well, this gentleman didn't want to finish and he didn't want to leave the chair. And he was told, sir, your time is up. He said, no, I'm going to keep on talking. And he got louder and louder. And the chair kept saying, sir, your time is up. And finally he said, sir, we will have you removed. And he said, so remove me, kind of thing. And Capitol Police came over and very gently said, we're going to remove you. Please relax. We're going to cuff you. And he kept just yelling. And they, two in front of him and one behind him, just gently lifted him up, cuffed him, walked him outside. He thought he was just going to get let go. And they said, no, you're going to be arrested.
Wow, so that's the first time anyone's been arrested in the Capitol like that?
Yes.
Wow, no kidding.
Arkansas is a very calm, kind. I mean, even when we disagree, we get along. He came back and spoke on the Senate side against the bill, and this time it was smooth as glass. He was just very polite, spoke his piece, and went right on. But he was allowed to come back.
Was there or what did you do when the compassionate argument comes your way, right? Like the dad whose child is suffering and he didn't get the issue at first, but now he does. What do you say to that?
Well, when you talk about the compassion, there are people that say, why didn't you have a grandfather clause? And where are you on that? And my thought is, we talked about the grandfather clause, and because that was one of the, we've been working on this bill for about 7 months. And the grandfather clause doesn't make any sense at all. Why would you keep putting a poison into a child's body? Oh, it's harming their body. Let's keep doing it. That's a bad idea. The issue with transgender and that population of suicide is incredible. They have a 19 times higher suicide rate. That's terrifying to me. But when they come off of these hormones, the puberty blockers and the cross-sex hormones, their suicide rate drops. So in this bill, all the healthcare is still there. They can still go and have counseling. They can detransition, which is important. Or if they decide, say they're 17 and a half and they want to get enough hormones to last them till they're 18, we're not going to be looking in anybody's medicine cabinet. But the counseling and the healthcare is there for them to detransition. So if they're 13, why would we grandfather them into something that we know is going to hurt that child?
Of course. Representative Robin Lundstrom, Arkansas. Assemblywoman, thank you for your courage. I bet this whole process wasn't easy for you.
This is a team effort. There were legislators from all over the state and different backgrounds that read the bill, stood up, and Arkansas has had my back. There are Arkansans I haven't heard from, total strangers that will come up and say, thank you. So it's been a team effort.
Good. Keep it up. Appreciate you, Ms. Lundstrom.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Let's here's to more wonderful bills coming out of Arkansas and the red states across the country who are going to save this country from the insanity coming from the coasts. Robin Lundstrom right there. All right, let's come back next. We'll talk about how this ideology of gender, it's called critical gender theory, how it's infiltrated our schools, starting at kindergarten, and then also what this means for men competing in women's sports, which is just like insane that anyone would be in favor of that, particularly the feminists. Why would the feminists be in favor of this stuff? Talk about that coming up next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slider Crusaders, welcome back to our special The Born Identity. In this segment, I want to talk about transgender sports, so men competing in women's sports. And first start off here, though, with this survey done of parents and school board members. It says 66% of parents and 80% of board members, school board members, do not think that schools should teach young kids in kindergarten, elementary school about sexual activity, sexual orientation, or gender identity issues. I look at that and I'm thinking, whoa, 66%, that's it? Who's the 34 that does? Emily Gow is here. She is from the wonderful Heritage Foundation. She's the director of the Richard Helen DeVos Center for Religious and Civil Society. Emily, how are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
Wonderful. Before we get to these numbers again, let's back it up just a second. I think there's still a lot of people that are like, oh, transgenderism, it's like point whatever percent of the population. Who cares? Why do conservatives make a big deal about it? Why do you think it's important? Why do you think it matters?
I think it matters because we should be free to hold different opinions on gender identity, but with the Biden administration and Congress poised to pass the Equality Act, we will no longer be able to disagree about gender identity. The Congress could impose a gender orthodoxy on the entire nation by passage of the Equality Act. And the Biden administration is already doing that through executive orders that have imposed transgender sports policies, bathroom and locker policies on all K through 12 public schools in the country. So parents need to be aware that this is coming, that this could be affecting children, not only in public schools, but also children in private schools if the Equality Act were to pass.
Wow. So the orthodoxy says what? The progressive orthodoxy on gender is what?
The progressive orthodoxy is a denial of the reality that we are born male and female, and it is imposing this idea that you can transition from being male to female or female to male. And when it comes to children, what it teaches children is that you could be trapped in the wrong body. You could be a little girl trapped in a boy's body or a little boy trapped in a girl's body. And that's why parents across the country are standing up and saying, no, we don't want our children to be indoctrinated into this progressive orthodoxy in schools. This is not why we send our children to school. And it undermines parental rights to teach children that their own family's views on biological sex are wrong or even that they're immoral.
I'm surprised by this survey going back here. First, so I'm surprised that it's only 66% don't want their kindergartners learning about transgenderism, right? And then I'm also kind of surprised that it's as high as 80% of school board members. Maybe it's just because I'm in California and all of our school board members, it's like 100% of our school board members want this. But that seems low for parents. What do you think of that?
I think that is the product of cancel culture. I think that this survey and similar surveys that we've done have shown that a very high number of parents are unwilling to answer the question, or they simply say they don't know. And I think that is a result of the threats that we face now from the left, that they are going to punish anybody for disagreeing with their orthodoxy on gender identity. And people are aware of what's going on, with authors having their books canceled by Amazon, like Abigail Schreier and Brian Anderson, who've written about transgender ideology. They know that, there's social pressure and economic pressure to conform to transgender ideology. And I think that's why they're afraid to say what they truly believe in surveys.
Let me give you an example of pressure to conform. This is the NC2A. They put out a statement. The NC2A Board of Governors firmly, unequivocally supports the opportunity for transgender student athletes to compete in college sports. This would be men competing in women's sports. When determining where championships are held, the NC2A policy directs that only locations where hosts can commit to providing an environment that is safe, healthy, and free of discrimination should be selected, on and on and on. That's what? What's happening? Like, what women are in favor of men competing in women's sports? I don't see how anyone could be in favor of that.
Well, I think the NCAA has unfortunately chosen politics over the integrity of sports. They are conforming to what they think corporate America wants. And corporate America is using all of their financial power to basically destroy women's sports. We've seen in states like South Dakota and Arkansas that major corporations that are being lobbied by the Human Rights Campaign have come out in opposition to protecting fairness for women and girls who are athletes. So big corporations like Walmart, the whole Fortune 500 has endorsed the Equality Act that would destroy, fair competition for women and girls all over the country.
That's amazing. This march through the institutions, and I'm so discouraged by the fact that obviously it's taken over the universities. We've known that for a while, but the fact that it's even taken over business as the last domino to fall, that's so discouraging because I don't know what one does to stand up against this, quite frankly. Let me ask you twofold how we do stand up to it, or what you would say. First, to the group of people that I think is the vast majority of people who just want to be compassionate, right? And they want to do the right thing. They want to be seen as nice. What do you say to that group of people, that group of parents who are like, no, let's teach this to kindergartners because that's the nice, because it's, open and blah, blah. What do you say to that group?
Well, I think every person has human dignity and should be treated with respect, and that includes people who identify as gay or transgender. So they should absolutely have the protection of all the freedoms that other Americans have. But I think when you're talking about imposing an orthodoxy on the medical profession and on education, you're actually talking about imposing a very dangerous ideology, especially when it comes to children, because the harms of treating children who have gender dysphoria, according to political viewpoints, those harms are irreversible and tragic. So what I'm talking about is when you have a little child who gets confused about their gender because maybe they're indoctrinated in school, and then they say to their, mom or dad, like, I might be, a girl trapped in a boy's body. Well, at that point, a lot of doctors would say you should just, wait until that child reaches puberty and just go through this period of watchful waiting, because most kids, 88% to 98%, end up becoming comfortable with their sex. But what transgender ideologues say, and what they want to put into law, is that doctors must treat children according to their beliefs. So that means going on hormones as young as 9, ultimately going on to have surgeries to basically castrate themselves. And this would lead to irreversible harms, not only the loss of their fertility, would sterilize them, but also it would lead to harms to their entire systems, their cardiovascular systems, their bone density, and their mental health. The transgender ideology leads to children being more likely to attempt and commit suicide rather than less.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's one of the narratives, that you have to let kids take puberty blockers and get a sex change operations, if that's even a thing. Because if they don't, they'll commit suicide. And it's we can't be threatened like that, when the reality is it's the opposite, as is usually the case. What do you say to the parent who says, this doesn't affect my kid, right? My kid's not transgender, so what's the big deal? I guess the question is, what are the societal implications of this that go just beyond the individual person?
Well, I think it actually does affect most children in this country if something like the Equality Act is to pass, or even the Biden executive orders, because children are being indoctrinated in their schools through all of the policies that I described, the sports policies, the bathroom and locker room policies, even the preferred pronoun policies, that their teachers have to address kids by preferred transgender pronouns rather than by biological sex. And then the danger of a federal mandate for gender identity curriculum across the country that would affect all children. It could affect not only, as I said, the public schools, but it could even reach into any private schools that accept federal funds from K through 12 to universities. So there really isn't a place for parents to hide. I know some parents say, well, homeschooling is the answer, but you can't just keep kids in the home. Kids go into society, they go into public accommodations, they go into, shopping malls and restaurants, they go into parks and recreation centers, and all those places would have transgender, facilities, policies. And then if they want to compete in sports at any level, whether it's K through 12, college, or even professional, they would have to follow this transgender policy. And of course, no parent really, thinks their child is transgender until the child becomes confused about their gender. And what we see now is social contagion, massive uprise in the number of children identifying as trans. And with all of these government policies, that's only going to go up.
Amazing. My last question for you, Ms. Gow. Why are they doing this? Like, as you're talking, I'm just like, this is so fast and so out of nowhere and so wildly unnecessary. What's the real root ideological drive for the small number of activists who are pushing this?
Well, I definitely think it comes from critical theory. So critical gender theory basically is the destruction of what it means to be male and female and the destruction of the nuclear family. And that's what Black Lives Matter has openly advocated for, is to destroy the nuclear family. And by undermining the rights of parents to raise their children according to, the belief that we're born male and female, that male and female are created for each other, that mothers and fathers are unique and each one matters, that does destroy the nuclear family. There is an important movement that your watchers should be aware of called the Promise to America's Children. And that is a movement of parents across the country, concerned citizens, and state and federal lawmakers who are trying to pass legislation like the bill in Arkansas, the SAFE Act, that protects adolescents from experimenting on their bodies to treat gender dysphoria. So it bans hormonal and surgical castration and sterilization of children.
Yeah, we definitely need more laws like that. Heritage.org, it's the Promise to America's Children. Emily Gow, appreciate your insight. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Keep fighting for this. I know we talked about this in the intro, but we talked to someone who deals with transgender people and kids, and he says 100% of the time their confusion is caused by trauma, an early childhood trauma, 100% of the time. And all this stuff we're doing around it is ignoring the root cause of the gender dysphoria in the first place. And it's not compassionate to ignore that. It's really sad. All right, coming up next, we'll talk about God's true vision for gender and gender roles. Coming up next. Spread the word. Hey, Cider Crusaders, welcome back to our special, The Born Identity. So we've just spent the first 2 segments of the show here talking about the attacks on gender and the attacks on even the existence of gender itself and the very concept of gender. So what is the truth? What is God's plan for gender? And also gender roles. David Engelhardt is here. He's the pastor of King's Church in New York City. Pastor, how are you today, sir?
Doing good, Mike. Good to be on.
Man, let's get back to the basics. What is God's plan for gender?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think a good way to intro it is just by talking about the contrast, which is, Jesus said that from the beginning, Satan, the enemy, the devil, the evil guy, his plan was to kill, steal, and destroy. He said specifically, Jesus says, he was a murderer from the beginning. So when we see the beginning of our origin stories, you have a man and a woman, and God looks at them and says, this is really, really good. I really like what's going on here. And he says to them, this is what I want you guys to do. I want you to, among the other things, be fruitful and multiply. So God's intention for man and woman in their specific roles in their nature is that they would be in a place of flourishing. That's the picture of the Garden of Eden. That word Eden means well-watered place. So they're situated in this place of flourishing, and then they themselves are flourishing. They're multiplying, and life is springing forth from them. And I think that's what we miss when we talk about, gender roles. It's like, God's a bad guy. He's got all these rules. He doesn't want you to do anything. He wants you to wear all black and sit quietly on a pew. But when we see the actual original intent of God, it's that man and woman are together in this incredible place of flourishing, and they themselves are flourishing and multiplying with life, which is, the greatest thing. If I was to ask you, Mike, what's the greatest thing in your life? What would you give your life for? You would probably immediately say, my wife, my kids. Well, those are the immediate answers that all humans say, because that is the great gift that God gave us. And that's why these roles are important.
So that's God's plan. How does Satan deceive, and why? What's his motivation?
The primary lie is that God's system or his way is deficient, and that it will bring you to a place of deficiency or need. So, this is the story. When the snake says to Eve, here's this tree, there's a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Like, people don't really understand what that means. What is it? What happens to you when you eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? But what happens to you is you become the arbiter of good and evil. You consume this knowledge base, and then you usurp God's position. And you say, God, instead of you being the guy with the rules and the order and this plan that we all flourish, I'm going to take into my hand the system of moral arbitration, and I'll tell you what I want to be, who I want to look like, what gender I want to be, what pronouns I want to be called. This now all belongs to me. And when the serpent comes, he says to her, hey, listen, God is really trying to withhold from you really incredible things. He knows that when you eat of the fruit, you will be like him, and you're like this diminished creature, and you really could be experiencing the fullness of life if you would only take the moral arbitration, consume it, and then rule your own life with that kind of moral set of principles. And that's what's happening in our culture. It's like the end of the book of Judges. It says, and each man did what was right in his own eyes. And when that was happening, that political form, that judicial form of rule in Judges, 19:20, it was coming to an end. And when we have a culture where each man does what's right in his own eyes, or in the moral sense, in the familial sense, in the gender sense, we have what appears to be, the coming end of a culture.
Let's transition to gender roles, because someone will look at, a progressive or feminist today, whatever. We'll look at the Bible and the list of gender roles and be like, oh, that was so 2,000 years ago, different era, different time. Get with the program, pastor. Be more modern, be more current, etc. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, when we're coming from this biblical position, we're saying that God's ultimate intention is the flourishing of mankind. And so, new theories and new ideas that are tried on mankind, on human nature, that are synthetic, that are separate from the way that humanity has structured itself for thousands of years, they almost always fail, not just fail, but fail colorfully and brutally and miserably. And you can think of something like the French Revolution as an analogy, where they say, we're going to use all of these Enlightenment principles. We're going to go do away with the church. We're going to do away with private property. And then you have the blood of thousands shed on the street by guillotine. And then a dictator has to come over and take control of the whole nation, because there's so much chaos and cacophony in their systems of commerce and morality. And they've thrown off the church because they were going to do it with this lightness and this enlightenist rational method. And it doesn't work. And we live in the same culture. Hey, try out these new forms. We're going to have 7 moms and it's going to work just as well. Well, it just doesn't. It's against basic human nature. It's against the moral order. It's against the natural order. And that's why when we look at the great thinkers, they don't just talk about scripture, but they talk about the natural order of life. And because we have science, we can eject the natural order of life, but we don't know the consequences that are coming.
Oh, great point. Okay, so what are the biblical gender roles? How do you interpret those?
Yeah, so I would say father kills. I would say father protects. I would say father sacrifices. The scripture says, husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So the role of the husband is sacrificial love for the family. And men want to sacrifice as long as they are honored in their sacrifice. So we have this anti-man culture, that women can do everything equal. So your role is not really that important. Your sacrifice is not really that important. And it diminishes the potential. It diminishes certainly the result of sacrifice in men. And so, and the other, that that scripture is one of my favorite about gender roles. Husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church. Wives, honor your husbands. It doesn't say husbands honor your wives, and it doesn't say wives lay down your life for your husbands and sacrifice for her. They're very distinct roles. If my wife is like, I'm not really in the loving mood, but I honor you, I'm like, yeah. It's a different context. It's what I'm made to receive. And because we've destroyed all that and said, no, everybody needs the same, we're fungible units, then we destroy the breakdown of really what feeds us in relationship one with another.
So good. Take us back to the garden about the fall, and what did God say one of the consequences was going to be for women ruling over men? How do we see that today?
Yeah, this is an interesting point because people don't like this part of the story. In the curse, it says that God says to Eve that your desire will be for your husband. And if you read the Hebrew there, it means to control or dominate your husband, not just for. That word for is a word that connotates domination. And he says, but he shall rule over you. So in the original garden, there was these two types, these two human beings that were serving one another. And here's the crazy thing. Man was made from dust and Eve was made from man. So she was a more refined being. More refined things are often more valuable, but weaker. And that's something that we don't understand. The Christian ethic has always said that women have greater value, but they're weaker vessels. And our culture says, well, if you don't have exactly the same positions, exactly the same thing, then we're not equal. We're saying, no, there's greater value. It's the life bearer, but the man is the stronger. That is why he's the protector. That is why he's the leader. That is why he's the sacrificer. But the curse comes in, and God says of the woman, you will want to dominate and control him, which is bad for you because you're going to be in a position as the weaker one where you're more vulnerable to the attacks of life and the world around you. You know, in the Trinity, we have equal parts, but they all co-submit. That's God's original intention. It's not that their roles are all exactly the same. They can have separate roles and equal value, but our world hates the idea of separate roles, and it really destroys our original intent and breaks that flourishing down.
And this is my last question. We've got about a minute. Why does the world hate us so much? And I've heard you talk before about how it was something like all these progressive systems or something hate kids or attack kids or something like that. What's your point here?
Yeah, the concept there is that it's Jesus says that the devil was a murderer from the beginning, and his primary intent, and this finds its manifestation in every what I would call secular ideology, that there's a root in those things that comes down to the hatred of life, and that the easiest thing to kill is human beings. And so when we have societies that worship sex, babies always get killed every time, whether it's through abortion or child sacrifice or whatever horrific means. When sex is worshiped, children are killed, and it's the enemy's, it's always his primary desire. You see these humanist philosophies, like one of our main goals is only 500 million people on the planet, overpopulation. All of that kind of insanity is based upon that same lie that humans should die. And that's why Jesus said of Satan, he was a murderer from the beginning through deceit, through bad ideas. His original intent was to kill human beings. And that's what happens when we bring in gender confusion, gender roles, instead of human flourishing and incredible life together, producing more life. Our lives get smaller, tinier, darker, and ultimately lead us to our own death.
Oh, so brilliant, so well thought through, Pastor. So I'm so grateful for you. Pastor David Engelhardt, King's Church, New York City, kcnyc.org. King'sChurchNewYorkCity.org. Appreciate you, Pastor. We clearly see the attacks and we see the truth of what we need to get back to. Grateful you've been here. Mike Slater, spread the word.